Okay, hello everyone. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Mary Collier. I'm the Professional Development Program Manager at the Ontario Museum Association, and I am very happy to welcome you to Climate Change Implications for Your Museum Practice. So I want to start by making sure that everybody knows how to participate. So you will see the slides and hear the presenters speak. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can simply type your message into the chat box, which will appear at the right of your screen. If you don't see it, there is a icon with a speech bubble at the bottom of your screen, and that will make the chat box appear. And so we'll be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to ensure that all of your questions are answered. And just be sure to select all participants in the to drop-down menu, just to make sure that everybody can see what you're saying. So my colleagues Vanessa Lambo and Ash Wickramasinghe are also signed in case anybody has any technical questions. So we'll again try and monitor the chat throughout. So today's webinar will be 1 hour, and we'll begin with an intro to the speakers and the topic, and then our three presenters will speak. There'll be about 15 minutes for discussion following the presentations, and we'll wrap at 1 p.m. So we have a moderator and three presenters for today's webinar, and I'd like to introduce our moderator. Robert Janes is a visiting research fellow in museum studies at the University of Leicester in the UK, and the founder and co-chair of the Coalition for Museums for Climate Justice. He's devoted his career to championing museums as important social institutions, capable of making a difference in the lives of individuals and their global communities. So I am now going to ask Bob to get us started and introduce the webinar and the speakers.
Thank you very much, Mary. Can you hear me? Mary, are we connected here?
You're a little bit quiet, Bob.
Okay, is this a bit better?
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Well, hello and welcome to this joint OMA and Coalition webinar on museums and climate change, the first of its kind, I'm quite sure. I'm Bob Janes, and I want to begin by thanking the OMA for making this partnership possible, especially Marie Lalonde and Mary Collier. And I also want to thank each of you for participating today. Your interest and support are really vitally important. Mary, would you please open the poll? Before I review our agenda and introduce our speakers, I want to provide some brief introductory remarks to set the stage. You might very well be wondering what museums have to do with climate change and what they could possibly contribute to addressing this critical global issue. I firmly believe that all types of museums are already capable and empowered to play a key role in addressing climate change because they have several unique characteristics that distinguish them from all other social organizations. In short, there are no other organizations that combine historical consciousness, public accessibility, and unprecedented public trust. And in addition, museums are grounded in their communities and are expressions of locality. They're a bridge between science and culture. Museums bear witness by assembling evidence and knowledge and making things known. They're seed banks of sustainable living practices that have guided our species for millennia. Museums are skilled at making learning accessible, engaging, and fun, and they're some of the most free and creative work environments in the world. So in short, museums are essential sources of information, ideas, and inspiration, and are ideally placed to foster both individual and community participation in addressing our worsening environmental challenges. And in thinking about these challenges, I think it's helpful to consider the words of cultural critic and author Neil Postman, who wrote that a museum must be an argument with its society. And a good museum always will direct attention to what is difficult and even painful to contemplate. It's this inspiring thinking that led to the founding of the Coalition of Museums for Climate Justice. The purpose of the coalition is to build the capacity of museums to help address climate change awareness, mitigation, and community resilience. We want to mobilize museums as participants and activists in public discussions and action on climate change and empower museums to lead by example. We now have over 1,600 supporters, including a blog, a Face group, and Twitter, a website, and a newsletter. We've also produced a series of 7 climate change videos in partnership with the Alberta Museums Association, specifically for museums and their audiences, and they are available free of charge to anyone who wishes to download them. In addition, we organize workshops and presentations for provincial, national, and international museum conferences, and we liaise with like-minded individuals and organizations globally, such as ICOM's new working group on sustainability and the network of conservators called Sustainability and Conservation. So please join us in the coalition if you haven't already done so, because the momentum is building. And now to today's agenda. I'll just recap what Mary said. It consists of 3 speakers, each of whom will speak for 10 minutes. We'll conclude the webinar with 15 minutes or so of questions and discussions from all of you, followed by brief comments from our coordinator, Mary, and me. I'd now like to introduce our speakers in the order of their appearance today. First, Laurie Carmount is the curator of the Minden Hills Cultural Center and Nature's Place in Minden, Ontario, where she's worked for the past 15 years. Second, Shiralee Hudson Hill is the lead interpretive planner at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, where she's been leading audience engagement initiatives for 12 years. She's also worked at Lord Cultural Resources, the Ontario Science Centre, and the National Museum of Ireland. And last, Ian Kerr-Wilson joined the City of Hamilton, Ontario Museum System in 1989 and is currently the manager of Heritage Resource Management, where he oversees 9 museums and historic sites, including 6 national historic sites. So with that introduction, let's please begin with our first speaker, and if I could call on Laurie.
Good afternoon. Let me just move the ball here. So to begin with some background, Minden Hills is a township of Haliburton County. The county has the southern part of the Algonquin Park within it and is located 2.5 hours north of Toronto. Population of 5,600, which quadruples in summer months with cottagers. The main industry is tourism, focusing on adventure, culture, and food. So Nature's Place is part of the Minden Hills Cultural Center, which also includes the Agnes Jameson Gallery, the Minden Hills Museum, and the Minden Library. Nature's Place has a collection of R.D. Lawrence's original manuscripts and personal artifacts which were gifted to the town in 2005. He's best known for his books Cry Wild and Patty, and in total he wrote 32 books in his lifetime. The following quote by him is displayed in the foyer of Nature's Place. Nature is careless of the individual, but careful of the species. We have reversed the maxim. We are careful of the individuals and careless of the species. That is the road to extinction. If you kill the species, the individual will follow. Nature's Place also incorporates in its logo the image of a white pine cone as a symbol to remind us of humans' impact on nature, as this tree became nearly extinct in Haliburton from excessive logging. So Nature's Place is a sustainable, low-impact building constructed from straw bales and earth plaster. The challenge to educate about climate change was broken down into 3 considerations: accessing expertise by partnering with local environment groups, maintaining a relevancy by relating to the local community, and incorporating collections. Within Haliburton, there are a number of groups that work to bring awareness to the community about the environment in some capacity. So we approached them to see what interest there would be in collaborating. This informative wall display was created with the assistance of the Haliburton Highlands Land Trust. We then incorporated each animal into a cutout with questions on the back, which visitors were asked to read information cards to fill in, and then they were to place the animals on a different wall that had 4 different habitats. Environment Haliburton took their participation one step further by holding some of their programming with us, such as their Environment Cafe nights. The group requested also a wall and worked with us to create a visual to explain climate change with supporting images of the direct consequences in Haliburton County. Another partner project was creating an interactive turtle tunnel that was designed with guidance of Paul Heaven, who is a local biologist, who has installed a real turtle tunnel at one of our busiest highways. Effectively, the turtles are corralled through the tunnel that runs under the road to the other side. This interactive display was designed much like Meccano with blocks. Visitors were building their road and creating their tunnels, passing turtles through, while they were reading about this success story and watching real footage on our interactive touchscreens. So Environment Haliburton also contributed towards their wall with a check of $500. Other displays were kept very simple. Our recycle challenge met with the biggest controversy and debate. Simply made with items on a bookshelf, people were asked whether or not it was recyclable. And there were some shocking discoveries when people realized if something wasn't. There was supporting information that explained what where you lived. It depended on what was recyclable, and it also explained that not recycling properly is costing us millions of dollars to rectify. We look globally as well and chose a theme for the year from Greenpeace Canada End Plastic Campaign. Because the walls in Nature's Place are adobe, we cannot put any holes in them for fear of punching through the barrier that keeps the straw sealed. So we constructed these metal walls that we can use earth magnets to hang displays with. The information posted was the most recent headlines about climate change taken from the internet, along with basic facts about plastic. We set up easel whiteboards where people made suggestions on what one could do to be plastic-free, which staff copied down regularly, posted, and then wiped the board clean to keep the dialogue going. We then looked to other collections at the Cultural Center. What of collections can relate to climate change? By simply displaying the museum's artifacts and pointing out how society lived before plastic was a good way to simply illustrate it has only been 150 years since plastic was introduced. And we are continuing to apply a new focus and rethinking our collections from this viewpoint. The most important part we concentrate on for Climate Change Action Program, however, is working with our youth, not just through displays and information, but by creating hands-on programming. For this, we considered everything, including our grounds outside the building. A team of high school students worked with us to change our grounds into gardens with flowers, herbs, and vegetables. This garden was called 1 to 3 and represented youth learning to grow their food for themselves and the community. Besides the traditional growing methods, they worked on ideas that would be suitable for small acreage, urban settings, shortened growing seasons, and rocky soil. They tried things like pallet salad gardens, straw bale gardens, and container growing. Nature's Place is becoming an innovative hub because of its community's inclusion. We welcome all to visit and see our enthusiasm. And this finishes my talk. And thank you for including Nature's Place Minden in this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laurie. That was really interesting and really prompted a bunch of questions. Excellent. So I'd like to call on Shiralee now for her presentation, please.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, let's get going here. Over to, oh no, down means up. Okay, so Shiralee here. I'm here to talk about Anthropocene. It was an exhibition that we hosted and that the NGO created and hosted here, and it just closed January 6th. But there is a concurrent exhibition named Anthropocene that is on at the National Gallery of Canada until February 24th. So there's still a chance to catch it there. It features the work of 3 artists, Edward Bertinsky, Jennifer Bechwal, and Nicolas Depensier. And both exhibitions include film, photography, and augmented reality. So, you know, what the heck is Anthropocene? You can also call it Anthropocene, especially if you're British. Scientists basically around the world are debating whether we have entered a new geological epoch. So technically right now we're in something called the Holocene, but these scientists think we should be in the Anthropocene because humans now change the Earth's systems on a geological scale more than all other natural processes combined. So for this project, which includes the exhibition, but also you may have seen the award-winning documentary, the artist traveled to 20 countries on 5 of the 6 continents and documented all sorts of human activity, those places on Earth that bear those irreversible marks of our human activity. So the exhibition had, in terms of the images, the films, the augmented reality, you saw several themes coming out. One was, of course, geological time, very difficult to represent, but here you have, these are called fleisch. These are sort of the upturned layers upon layers of rock upturned from the ocean floor, that each little layer represents 10,000 years, and that, of course, human activity's really only been around for about 11,000 years, so we're but one little strip amongst those rocks. In the exhibition, we also saw technofossils. Those are those human-made things that are actually ending up in the geological record. This is actually a landfill in Dandora, and I mean, these images to see in person, to see the large scale, just the amount of plastic and the amount of waste that we consume. Other themes the exhibition explored, this is part of a film at the Dandora landfill, are things like resource extraction and mining for things. This is phosphorus, so something that's used in fertilizer for all those delicious, healthy foods that we eat. This is a large open pit coal mine in Germany, in Hambach, and this is something called a Bagger 291. It's one of the largest, the largest mining, and in fact, one of the largest, it's called a bucket wheel excavator, and it weighs about 14,000 tons. It's just immense. I mean, to see this on screen, it is the largest land machine on Earth. This looks like a glacier when you see it. Let's see, in terms of also Other themes you'll see, we have timber, the logging industry. The Canadian content from the show largely comes from works that explore the logging industry and clear cutting on Vancouver Island. You also have things like agriculture, which have huge impact on Earth. These are greenhouses in Spain. Species loss. In the exhibition, there was a whole sort of section that this was a major moment in Kenyan history where the government decided it was time to say this is the end to the ivory business symbolically. So on April 30th in 2016 in Nairobi National Park, they had stockpiled how many tons was it? It was absolutely tons and tons of elephant tusks, rhinoceros horns, and they burnt it. And in the exhibition, there was a film of this, and there was also an augmented reality installation where visitors could see this burn for themselves. And there you can see someone interacting. So the tusk pile didn't exist except on your own personal mobile device or on iPads that we provided. There was also the idea of population growth and density. This is actually this is the fastest growing city in the world, Lagos in Nigeria. And this was an interactive large photographic mural. So if you held your device up using the Avara app, film extensions would trigger that would take you deeper into the city. So for example, short film of the city market. And then there's also the story of the good Anthropocene. So for example, this is a lithium mine, and lithium is what powers our cell phones, but also electric cars. So there are, even though this is mining, there are stories of viable alternatives. So you would have also seen images, for example, of solar panels in the exhibition. The artists like to say that their ambition for this exhibition and for this project was to be revelatory, not accusatory, and that the shifting of consciousness was the beginning of change for them. And we chose this as, in terms of the exhibition planning team and the interpretive planning team, we chose this as our mantra, that idea of being revelatory, not accusatory, and that we're trying to shift visitors' consciousness in the hopes of bringing about a little bit of change. And so at the end of the exhibition, we had a space that we called the Change Station. So it was almost like as a debrief station as you left. And out on the floor, as it turned out, we heard again and again, after visitors had seen these plastic cram landfills and glacier-sized coal mines, they were asking, what can I do? And the show was having quite an emotional impact on our visitors. So anticipating this, we had this change station, and it featured information, digital interactives, important links to organizations that, for example, the artists were working with every day, so that we could turn that story of the Anthropocene epoch into a good news story. It featured a large touch screen. Oh, let me bring up the image. Here, that was a map of the world where we had a prompt. How do these works connect to our daily lives? What can we do? Explore here. So each of these pinpoints features an image from the exhibition. For example, coral reefs in Indonesia, oil refineries in Texas, a Russian potash mine, and we had pop-ups that you could tap and see how that faraway place actually connects to you and your daily life. So potash goes into fertilizer that helps grow the vegetables and the fruits that you eat. And then we also included different ways that you could get involved and bring about change. We also had a wall where we talked about carbon. Oh, you can see that's just another shot of the touch screen. We had this whole space that you see kind of on the left side of this image where we talked about carbon and what is carbon offsetting, what does it mean to cut carbon, how can I reduce my own carbon footprint, and what are the artists and the AGO doing to reduce their carbon footprint. We also sent visitors to different carbon footprint calculators that they could do and just gave a few tips. And then we also ended the show on this, which was we called it an emotional check-in station, and it was ostensibly a poll. And we asked, in one word, how does what you've seen here make you feel? And almost 130,000 votes were cast during the run of the exhibition. So this definitely makes it one of the most successful digital strategies of all time here at the AGO. And what was interesting, I spent a lot of time in that space observing visitors, and it was a point of debate and discussion for visitors. So that moment of trying to choose and looking at what other people had voted, most of our visitors visit in twos, so it became a point of debate and discussion amongst those visitor groups, which was really interesting. And then, so I have here, and this is what the screen would have looked like. We had iPads embedded, so there you see different emotions that they can choose up. So I thought we would run the poll here really quickly. So in a word, how do the images you've seen here today make you feel? You can cast your vote over there, and we'll see if we've got the same results as what happened in Anthropocene. The other thing we did to connect with visitors was, and here, as you vote, you could see here's what our outcomes were. Worried and sad, unfortunately, were at the top of the list. Jennifer Bayshore was really hoping motivated would be there. And it didn't really change that much throughout the run of the show, I have to say. And then also, let's just see, we also created a podcast. And from the very initial meetings we had with our curator, Sophie Hackett, and the curator from the National Gallery, Andrea Cunard, it was really a moment to explore the issues sparked by the exhibition and create a dynamic space for a diversity of perspectives, and including an indigenous through line, indigenous voices was paramount. So I do encourage you, if you go, for example, episode 3 was all about decolonizing the Anthropocene. We had a wonderful host, Serene Fox, who is an Anishinaabe dancer, activist. She's absolutely incredible. So to learn more about our podcast, I do encourage you to visit our website, www.ago.ca, but you can also listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. There's our host, Serene, with the artists. That was part of the recording. Here's just a few of our guests: Elizabeth Colbert from The New Yorker, Sheila Watt-Cloutier, a Nobel Prize nominee. And I think when I starting to reflect back on the work we did in Anthropocene, I just think about the importance of storytelling and how we can connect our visitors to climate change through asking questions, the kind of visitor response stations that Laurie talked about, and really, I guess, relating what climate change to people's everyday lives. And that is it. If you have questions, please, the chat is open, and then also feel free to email me. Thanks so much.
Ian Kerr-Wilson.
Let's see if I can get this. Oops, wrong way. Naturally. I'm going the wrong way, aren't I?
Yeah.
Nope, still not getting there. Hang on. There we go. Well, with that little diversion through the previous talk, I'd like to occasionally start with this photograph. This is actually a couple of photographs from Hamilton Harbour and after the First World War era. This is ice harvesting in Hamilton. It's an industry which existed for 80, 100 years or so, up until the 1930s. Of course, it doesn't exist anymore for a variety of reasons, but one of the main ones is that the harbor doesn't freeze anymore. And there are a couple of reasons for that, but the obvious one is what we're here talking about. We touched on this right at the introduction. I won't go through it. I just want to do it very briefly. City of Hamilton, this section We operate 9 museums, including historic sites and children's museums and a community museum as well. We're also sort of much more of a sort of full service operation. We're involved in adaptive reuse in the city, collections, events, plaques. We care for a large number of monuments and cenotaphs through the city, plus a bunch of heritage strategies and policies. All in all, there's about 70 acres or so of open space and green space under our stewardship attached to the museums. So as I say, we're something of a full service operation. Bob asked us to touch a little bit on mandate issues, and I think I'm going to take a slightly different take on this than some people might. And this comment's going out as much as anything else to the other people who are listening in, who are municipal employees or government employees or receiving funding from levels of government. But to some degree, it also applies to any operation that considers itself a community operation, community institution. If you look briefly here at happens to be the strategy for the city of Hamilton. You'll notice it talks about aging, best place to raise a child, age successfully. It talks about sustainable development, and under its mission and the priorities, it talks about clean and green and culture and diversity and a few other things. The point is that this was adopted by our city council, which in my world means that's my board of directors. So I don't actually get to say, oh, I run an industrial heritage museum or I run an historic site. It's not my mandate. I don't have to do any of this. The reality is you do. These are your marching orders. And so you don't really have an argument for saying, oh, well, I'm an 1850s historic house. I'm not involved in dealing with issues around climate change and the environment. The fact is you are, and your board has told you to do it. So that, I'm going to argue that most municipalities would have something rather like this. It wouldn't have the same wording, but I'm willing to bet that most of them have visions and missions that are somewhat similar and have similar strategies. I'd be a little surprised if there was a municipality out there that didn't have something around sustainability and environmental stewardship involved in their priority somewhere. So the result is that I'm actually tasked to find ways in which the programming of the museums, and in fact our whole operation, actually meets these priorities. And there are a series of action plans associated with it, but I actually do have to implement that. That is a specific direction for me, and I would imagine for a number of you. Now, fortunately for us, prior to that, going back to about 2003, we started adopting heritage resource management principles into our operation. And in 2015, we did a slight comb through, and we actually started talking about the three-legged stool of heritage resource management. That's preserve, present, and also sustain. Now, sustainability is implied in preserve and present. Obviously, you're not preserving for the short term, but we chose to pull sustain out as a separate item in order to focus on it, in order to identify it as something that had to be built into our programming and built into our thinking and planning. And that, of course, is financial and social and environmental and cultural. But we also talk a lot about community sustainability, that our task is to be embedded and be necessary in the lives of our citizens and necessary to the health of the community. And we have to matter. And so that's one of the ways in which we define sustainability. Over the next few slides, I'm going to be touching on each aspect of that notion. But just to emphasize that this is in many ways, this almost sits above the mandates of our individual sites. When we talk about our steam museum being the Industrial Heritage Museum of Hamilton, collecting blah blah from this date to this date, that sort of is a lower tier. What sits above here, the why in which we do what we do, is around preserve, present, and sustain. And that's embedded in all our policy documents. Okay, so one of the things that we are involved in is we do have this large 2-acre Victorian garden that's attached to one of the historic sites. It's fully 2 acres. It operates as if it's the mid-1850s in terms of 1850s varieties, 1850s gardening techniques. We get a lot of criticism from people angry at us because we throw out all the food, which is interesting because we don't actually throw out any of the food. Everything we grow is in fact retained. But it kind of speaks to people's attitudes and where their focus is. The assumption is we do throw it out and they're upset about that. So it's in fact, as we were starting the development on this garden about 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, the issue of how we were going to be doing this in a sustainable and appropriate manner came up. Because in fact, we produce an enormous amount of, a number of vegetables out of this. I'll just mention in passing, by the way, it's not actually an organic kitchen because, or garden, because 1850s gardening wasn't organic. The reality is that the bulk of what we grow is either retained within the operation, and we use it in our programming, but literally tons of it are given to Neighbor, which is a local not-for-profit in Hamilton. It is yes, somewhat of a food bank, but it's also very much an educational institution. It actively promotes urban agriculture and sustainable practices. It teaches cooking, it teaches gardening, it teaches preserves. And that to all ages. What you're looking at here is actually one of our partner programs with Neighbor to Neighbor. The garden itself is just off to the right of the picture, and you can see a couple of people in costume at the back teaching a youth group basic gardening techniques that they can take home and start urban agriculture in their backyards. As well, I don't have a good picture of this, unfortunately, but one of our operations has a community garden in the back. Our off-site storage facility we've established a community garden back there, actually behind the building. It's a little scary because this is Hamilton, so they do use raised beds because that particular part of Hamilton is one of the most toxic areas in the city. But they've sealed it and built up gardens. We also have plans for a couple of our adaptive use projects, which haven't come to fruition yet, but 2 of them do have community gardens built into the plan. Probably looking at that over the next 3-4 years that those would actually be in place. The last thing I want to touch on fairly briefly is the global network of water museums. What you're looking at here is the group of charter members. This was in the Netherlands last year. I'm the ugly guy on the left, 4 rows back. The global network was endorsed by UNESCO and the International Hydrological Program in June of 2018 as an affiliate program supporting the achievement of the UN Sustainability Group goals, particularly goal number 6, which is on water, which is on the ensuring the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. That goal has 7 goals and measures associated with it. Here you can see the goals. It's important to understand all of these goals as interconnected. So the number 6, clean water and sanitation, is not distinct from number 13 on climate action. And that's an understood that each of these interrelates, and whether it's reducing inequalities or some of the other goals around urban development. So they both the UNESCO and IHP recognize and promote that each goal interconnects. The action items of what we call WWAMU-Net for short, that they support in Hamilton are a series of events, including World Water Day, World Toilet Day, We have a traveling exhibit, which is just a few years ago was retired. It's called We All Live Downstream. It's about the sustainability of water and the interrelationship of water and other development issues. And also a large number of our school programs are directly tied to taking expectations from the Ontario curriculum and applying it to the SDG. Other museums in the network are involved in reestablishing forests through flood management and community action. A lot of the museums that are involved in the program or in the network are very much community development based programs or institutions. And they are literally all over the world. There's a fabulous museum in Ecuador, and there's another one in Burkina Faso. They're just doing, and in Mexico, they're just doing fabulous work around sustainable development programs and sustainability developments in their local neighborhood. The last thing I'll touch on very briefly, this is the network was involved in the Great Rivers Forum, which was in Wuhan, in China this last fall. Again, this was organized by UNESCO in China. The network was one of the lead partners and actually handled one of the recurring sessions and themes. And what came out of those discussions, again from an international audience, was recognizing that in this case, museums in this case are not. They are merely tools of promoting the achievement of these goals, these sustainable and development goals, that we are using museums as the tool. So water sustainability comes first. That's the goal. Museums are the tool, and that's a bit of a paradigm shift for those of us who were in that meeting who come from a museum background, because we see it the other way around. But we are very much having our brains changed while we were in this meeting. Anyway, I think that's my last slide, just back to the reminder about the fact that Hamilton Harbour doesn't freeze anymore. Thank you.
We're really running right on schedule. But before we go to the question and answer, I wonder, Mary, if you could please share the results of the first poll that we did early on at the beginning of the webinar.
Hi, I think that should have done it. Bob, if you could get a bit closer to your mic the next time you speak, you were a little bit quiet there. Thanks.
Okay. Did you hear what I said?
Ah, that's better. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could share the results of the first poll that we did.
Okay. I think it should be up. If you've got a polling section collapsed, if you just click on that to expand, that should have the results of the initial poll.
And where do we find the polling?
It should be at the bottom right hand of your screen.
Okay. All right, so I think now it's time for questions and discussion with our speakers and our participants. Those were stimulating presentations, and I for one have a lot of questions, so I'm certainly not going to hog the time. Mary, can we start the questioning with the speakers now?
We certainly can. So if anybody who has a question could please type it into the chat and make sure that you're selecting either all presenters or panelists or all participants so that everybody can see your question.
Well, maybe while we're waiting for that, can you hear me okay, Mary?
Yep, I have you coming through now.
Okay, maybe I could just begin the discussion with a question. Just starting with Laurie, if I could. Laurie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I was wondering, what was your audience, your normal audience, particularly aware of climate change before you started all your work? Or is what we saw today a result of your nurturing that awareness? Or was your audience already kind of tuned in?
Our community, I think, is maybe more so aware than most. I've, since doing this webinar, have talked to other communities, and I think our number of actual groups that are wanting to advocate in some manner for our environment is quite high. So that's great. Visitors who came to Nature's Place this past summer were very animated. I think 5 years ago would have had a different response. So I would say a majority of people are definitely very aware, and they were very happy to see that there was as much environment, climate change information being offered. So we were excited about that. And I think the participation in it, we found the hands-on parts to be much more accepted than anything that was being offered on the computer. And I think it's because anybody can use the computer, but they like to interact with one another with active pieces. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It certainly does. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hi, so we do have a question for Ian from Caitlin, who says, I was very interested in the water initiative, and as a museum professional who has always thought museums first, what was your perspective, and what made you start thinking that actually there's a point here that we may have to start shifting our priorities?
Oh, interesting question. I think the exposure to an international audience of people who are coming at these issues from very different places. I'll give you an example. There's a couple who are running a museum down in Mexico, a couple of hours southeast of Mexico City, and they graduated back in the 70s in community development and sort of neo-Marxist stuff, and they headed off to this town, and they met with the people in the town, and spent some time and talking to them and find, okay, what do you need in order to develop, to grow as a community. And that's where, and they said, well, we need a museum, and we need a museum so that we can start doing education around how to care for our environment and how to develop our environment. And the museum was a product of their community development goals. And that's just one example. I could go around the table of the people I was meeting with, and it really shocked me is the wrong word. It just gave me a reset about understanding that museums are what, they're not why. It was really, it was quite an eye opener, and as I say, a real paradigm shift, which I'm still struggling with, let's be honest.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks. We have another question for Shiralee from Christine. How does your work on the Anthropocene fulfill the AGO's mission?
Yes, I was just typing a response. So the AGO's mission is to bring people together with art to see and experience and understand the world in new ways. And just before I started working on Anthropocene, so I guess that would have been maybe 2017 at some point, our director, Stefan Jost, said that he definitely saw the environment and climate change as one of the issues of the next, of the coming decades. And shortly after that, I think at that time he knew we were planning Anthropocene. I didn't. It is a way for us we see art as a way to explore, and even if that's art from Italy in the 16th century is a way to explore and connect with contemporary issues and with our community. Our vision is to become the imaginative center of our city and our province and welcome visitors, inspire audiences, and be innovative in the way we bring people together and create community through art. So I think all of those things were happening in Anthropocene. On a smaller level, I was really thrilled to see some changes specifically in terms of what the AGO could do on a day-to-day basis. We removed straws from our cafe and bottled water. We had a lot of prepackaged foods prior to Anthropocene, and starting in Anthropocene, we started a pilot, and then all the foods in our cafe were made fresh and on plates with real cutlery, not disposable cutlery. So I think it was we have a refillable water station. So I'd like to see how we're going to grow that in the next future, into the coming years, because certainly museums are waste makers, and I also hope we can become change makers in that area.
Shiralee, if I could just follow up on that. So do you see yourself now as an advocate for social environmental issues, as an activist?
I don't know. That's a very, very good question. I think probably the next year or two will tell if we can continue the conversation around Anthropocene. Now, we are setting up, one way we're continuing that conversation, there was a question earlier if this exhibition was going on tour. And, people in our exhibitions department right now are planning the tour of Anthropocene, the global tour. The only stop I can tell you about right now is MAST in Bologna, in Italy in 2019, but there are other stops being planned. The artists always hoped that this project, so the documentary and the exhibition, would make Anthropocene a household word, because they talked to their friends, they went to talks, and they said, who knows the word Anthropocene? No one knew the word. I didn't know the word before working on this show. And then, as an aside, I was in New Brunswick in December in a cafe when I found out, I got an email that said our podcast, Into the Anthropocene, had been named one of the top podcasts of 2018 by Apple. And I told the guy working in the cafe in St. John, New Brunswick, and he said, oh yeah, Anthropocene. That's the human impact on Earth. I saw the documentary, at the film series. So I think that idea of getting that message out there into the world, that's anecdotal. It's anecdata, but it's starting. There is a shifting consciousness happening.
Thank you, Shiralee. That's great. Mary, do we have time probably for maybe one or two more questions?
Okay. At this point, we just have a quick follow-up question for Shiralee about if museums are interested in hosting the exhibit, can they reach out to you?
Yes. Well, just please email me and shiralee.hudson@ago.ca, and I will get them in touch with the right people.
Wonderful. We have another question from Charles. Just any suggestions for climate actions in organizations with smaller budgets?
I throw that one out to each of our panelists to jump in.
Well, for Nature's Place in Minden, I don't think you can get a smaller budget. So that's why we kept it very, very simple. And we reached out to experts in our community who are absolutely more than willing to volunteer their time and participate with us, and have continued to participate with us. So that's really how we managed on a shoestring.
And Charles, I could add to that in terms of programming and raising awareness, as I mentioned earlier, we created those climate change videos with the Alberta Museums Association, and they're available free of charge for you to use in any sort of programming and public programs at your museum. So that would be one really low budget way, at least to start getting the word out. One more quick question. Anything else, Mary?
it looks like we don't have any more questions, but just a comment from Christine about much of what Shiralee was talking about in terms of greening the museum might be applicable to any site in terms of using no plastics in the gift shop, things like that.
Uh-huh. Well, that's great. I mean, we are right on schedule, so I guess it's time to wrap this up. I thought that was a very useful and sometimes powerful and very insightful 1 hour of time. And I want to thank each and all of you for taking time out of your busy day to register and listen and participate in this webinar. I'm also very grateful to our 3 speakers today for their generosity of time and commitment in sharing their important work. They are modeling the behavior that really all of the museum community in the world needs to start to adopt. And last, my thanks go to the OMA again, and especially Chris Castle, who is the Coalition's coordinator of social media. And she was instrumental in the design and organization of this webinar, as was Mary. Just one final request for me as your moderator. Please consider joining the Coalition of Museums for Climate Justice. We really need all of your intelligence, your passion, and your commitment to address this critical issue. So thank you again, and I wish each of you the best of success with your important work on climate change. And now I can turn over the closing to Mary.
Okay, thanks very much, Bob. Actually, just to finish off, I'm just going to open the second poll, which is kind of a follow-up to the first one. This time looking at what you might be planning to do personally or as an institution in the future rather than what you are currently doing, just in case there is any plans for the future. And we'll just let that go for a minute and let people respond, and then we can show the responses. But just while people are completing that final poll, I want to also extend our thanks to Bob, to Laurie, to Shiralee, and to Ian for sharing your experiences with us today. It's been a really thought-provoking way to begin the new year, I think. And again, as well, thank you to Chris Castle and everyone who's part of the Coalition of Museums for Climate Justice for making sure that the impact of our work and what the impact that it has on the planet is top of mind and something that we're continuing to think about. I want to thank everyone who signed in today for your participation. We have been recording this webinar and we'll make that available as soon as it is ready. I just also want to remind, we have, I think, quite a few people who are new to the OMA participating, so just a reminder about who we are and the benefits of membership. Just making sure that you're keeping in the loop with what's going on in Ontario and finding out about things like this or other kinds of professional development opportunities we might have, and online resources and things. So on the screen now is just all the ways that you can get in touch with us, and I would encourage you to do so. So I'm going to close the poll. Just let everybody finish up real quick in just about 10 seconds, and then when that's done, I'll show the results. Dun, dun, dun. Okay.
That's a very fast way of doing it.
So you should be able to see the results on the screen now. And just a final request to please provide your feedback on this webinar, and a reminder that the recording will be made available, and that will be publicly available. We'll put it on our YouTube channel so that you can share it with colleagues who may not have been able to attend today. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Mary, for all your good work, and a thank you again to all the participants and our panelists.